This is ANCAP-SU, and we're going to discuss the STF ministers who ruled that Brazilian banks can't comply with the Magnitsky Law. What a remarkable decision. In other words, people will likely seek a Venezuelan-style solution, and Brazil will have to isolate itself from the rest of the world to obey the magnanimous STF ministers. That's exactly what we warned would happen, my friend. I warned it would happen. It's logical that when the Magnitsky Law is applied in Brazil, the ministers would claim they're not affected, right? Brazilian banks will face a dilemma. Either they give up operating in the United States, or they give up the accounts of these ministers. However, the ministers won't allow the latter. Consequently, they'll be unable to give up the ministers' accounts and will be completely ruined. This is precisely what's happening. This news was suggested by Nina, a muse of Jido and butcher of Manchurian dogs, among others. Thanks to those who suggested news on our site, Visa Libertarian, and thanks to you for watching our video. If you enjoy our content, please like and subscribe to our channel. Look at this curious outcome, right? The STF ministers did exactly what we predicted. Of course they would. The ones who will be harmed in this whole situation are the Brazilian banking system. And people who have accounts in banks here in Brazil, I'm talking about you, my dear listener. I'll also be affected, we'll all be affected. Because Brazilian banks will end up being cut off from the global banking system due to this mess that the CF continues to make. Right? It was extremely predictable. They would say they would apply Brazilian law, the Consumer Protection Code, and so on. Although the Consumer Protection Code doesn't say that banks have to accept anyone as a client, it's very clear on this point. There are conditions for opening a bank account. Not just anyone can walk into a bank and open an account. That's already the case today. The Consumer Protection Code has nothing to do with it. So although Brazilian law doesn't say that, it's obvious that the STF, since the judges themselves are affected, will understand that Alexandre de Moraes' account must be maintained. Which can't be affected. Look at this news. It's a significant one. Honestly, if you have bank stocks, I'd advise selling them if I were you. STF ministers consulted about the value don't rule out a potential court decision. Opposition to the application of the Magnitsky Law by banks operating in Brazil in case of account freezes. So, if accounts are frozen, it's game over. The law was applied in July against Alexandre de Moraes by the U.S. government, and there's a possibility it could affect other court members and their family members. The sanction states that any financial institution operating in the U.S. or conducting transactions in US currency can be required to freeze assets and close accounts, such as canceling credit cards. The minister currently sees no indication that banks will prevent Moraes' financial operations in Brazil, so banks are currently keeping a low profile. I told you so. I also think the U.S. will wait a while. They'll wait to see if the STF will change course, resolve the issues, etc. But if the STF continues with this illegal trial of Bolsonaro, things will take a different turn, right? If this actually occurs, they say the court may choose to intervene based on Brazilian law. Brazilian law doesn't specifically address a bank denying someone an account. However, banks have the right to deny accounts to individuals. The Consumer Protection Code states that banks cannot deny an account for arbitrary reasons. For example, I don't like your face, so I won't give you an account. No, now. If having a bank account requires a monthly income of, say, 30,000 reais, and believe me, there are banks in Brazil that require a monthly income. I know of a bank where I did some security work which requires 300,000 reais to be kept on deposit just to open an account. And many people have accounts in that bank, right? There are many wealthy individuals here in Brazil, so there's nothing that obliges a bank to open an account for someone, right? However, it can't deny opening an account based on subjective criteria. For instance, I'm not opening an account because you have unusual hair. You're bald, I don't like bald people, so I won't open an account. No account for bald people. No, this can't be done. However, you can set certain criteria, including the criterion of not being on the OFAC sanctions list, right? Because it's an obvious criterion, right? It's a criterion that every bank already applies, because they evidently know about USS sanctions. Here it is. There's a request to the STF to prevent the freezing of accounts of legal entities by banks operating in Brazil. It was filed by Lindbergh and Farias. Apparently, a congresswoman also introduced a bill to try to counteract the effects of the Magnitsky Law in Brazil. What these people are forgetting is that the effects of the Magnitsky Law are not felt in Brazil, but in the United States. The United States is saying that if a bank wants to do business with Alexandre de Moraes, it can't do business with the United States. And what's the issue with this for Brazilian banks? It's crucial for a large bank to have business dealings in the United States. There's no alternative to this. If they don't have business in the United States, the bank will fail because it will be excluded from the global financial system. It will become a bank like those in Venezuela, where you can't do anything. So last week, Cristiano Zanin and Gilmar Mendes discussed the topic with bankers. We've already discussed this conversation several times, right? People are terrified. They left there terrified by the possibility. And people who were present at the meeting told Valor that the banks did not show any intention of halting financial operations in Brazil. So to recap, credit cards, anything that goes through the dollar, is already blocked. But operations in Brazil, Alexandre de Moraes' account and debit card for him to use, are still operational here in Brazil. Although they appeared concerned about how to act in case of a threat of US sanctions, it's like I told you, how does the Magnitsky Law work? At first, it puts a lot of controls in place a lot of things already don't work, but in addition, people can try to circumvent the Magnitsky Law. With that, they issue specific orders or threaten sanctions. Someone can notify the United States, for example, that the Bank of Brazil still has an account belonging to Alexandre de Moraes where he receives his salary. And in this case, the United States will issue a warning to the Bank of Brazil saying, look, here's the thing. We have detected that you are in violation of the FOC list. So in this case, we will impose a significant fine on you if you don't resolve this situation. As I told you, you don't even need to send a notice to the FOC. They already know everything Alexandre de Moraes has in his account. The whole issue is that Trump is giving them some time because it was a severe blow. Let's see how the court reacts and resolves this problem. If they take the right path and acknowledge their wrongdoing, as Alexandre de Moraes has already started to do, admitting his mistake in the São Paulo TQL, having already admitted his mistake and so on, if they follow the right path, no problem, everything's fine. Alexandre de Moraes can continue without a foreign bank account, without the ability to travel, without a credit card, but he can keep his account here in Brazil. No one will bother him if the issues at hand are resolved. The whole issue is whether that happens. If Alexandre de Moraes insists, if this STF insists on keeping Bolsonaro arrested and follows through with this action of Alexandre de Moraes' coup, which is completely illogical, there's no principle behind this. It's completely non-juridical and totally political. They state that the conversation addressed Brazilian legislation regarding the potential impacts of Magnitsky and described the meeting as calm. Calm like that, I imagine the bankers are saying, look, this is going to be bad, right? It's going to be bad. But initially, it was calm. For now, it remains calm. Rodrigo Maia also stated that the conversation took place in a tranquil atmosphere. According to him, potential new sanctions involving relatives of ministers were not discussed. Instead, there was a productive dialogue with members of the court. In other words, this is what these people fear, right? As I've already mentioned to you, the minister's salary is a good one, 50,000 reais per month. Just think, 50,000 per month in your pocket, my friend. It's a good salary, but Barroso has an apartment worth $4 million. You can't say 50,000 reais per month to amass 4 million. No, you can't. My friend, the money comes from elsewhere. And where does it come from? It comes from law firms registered in the names of wives, children, or associates of that person. So they know that if they start down this path, things will go wrong for them. So again, Trump hasn't blocked Brazilian banks yet because he chose not to. He's waiting for the CF to respond appropriately. If the STF responds appropriately, great, there's a chance. We're already hearing that Alexandre de Moraes believes the first panel will indeed deny Bolsonaro's pretrial detention there. The house arrest of Bolsonaro, and it's possible that once that's done, Bolsonaro's case will completely fall apart, so it's possible there won't be a problem. There's no need to implement all of this. Now, the problem is, if it continues, as we discussed regarding the Financial Times report, in the end, if it continues, if Lula remains steadfast, if the CF remains firm, my friend, the limit of this is the complete destruction of Brazil. That's what's going to happen. The banking system will be first.